The construction is complete. We are very pleased with the placement, despite your concerns.
As you can see on the plat map, the boundary runs exactly along this marker. Your trench is several feet over the line.
We just need this little strip here to make the entrance symmetrical. It shouldn't be a problem, right?
This is your final warning. If construction continues without the proper ARC approval, we will assess daily fines starting tomorrow.
I told her this was the property line. Just tear it out, we have the permits. The setback requirement clearly states 10 feet. This monument is in violation. Cease operations until we schedule a full review.
The first thing I saw that morning was not sunlight, not my front yard, not even my dog waiting by the glass door. It was a stone wall. A brand new, waist-high, gray stone entrance sign had been built overnight at the corner of my property, with 2 black iron lanterns bolted into the top and a polished metal plaque that read, "Welcome to Briar Glen Estates." The problem was, Briar Glen Estates had not built it on community land. They had built it on mine. I stepped outside barefoot, still holding my coffee, and stared at the fresh concrete poured across the strip of grass beside my driveway. Orange cones were scattered along the curb. A contractor's truck was parked half over my driveway apron. 2 men in neon vests were unloading bags of mulch, like they had every right to be there. Then I saw Linda Carver, the HOA president, standing near the sign with a clipboard tucked under one arm, smiling like she had just unveiled a monument. I asked her what she thought she was doing. She did not apologize. She did not look surprised. She did not even pretend this was a mistake. She simply said, "This is the new entrance feature. The board approved it months ago." I pointed at the concrete base and told her it was on my parcel. My survey markers were still there, half buried under loose dirt, proving the line ran several feet beyond where they had placed the sign. Linda glanced at the flags, then back at me, and said, "That little strip has always looked like part of the entrance. The HOA maintains appearances here. You should be grateful we improved it." Behind her, the contractor kept working. When I told him to stop, Linda raised her voice loud enough for the neighbors walking their dogs to hear. "If you interfere with approved HOA property, we will fine you for damaging community improvements." Community improvements, on my land. That was the moment my hands started shaking, not from fear, but from the kind of anger that makes everything around you go quiet. A stone entrance, electrical wiring, landscape lights, and a public sign had just appeared on land my name was attached to at the county recorder's office. And the woman responsible was threatening to fine me for objecting. I did not know it yet, but that sign would end up costing the HOA far more than they ever imagined. It would bring in code enforcement, a county inspector, an attorney, an insurance claim, and a public meeting where Linda would have to explain why she used HOA money to build an entrance on private property. But standing there that morning, all I had was my coffee, my survey flags, and a camera above my porch recording every word. I bought that house 6 years after my divorce. With a credit score I had rebuilt one payment at a time, and a down payment that came from working overtime, skipping vacations, and pretending I did not mind driving the same old car for almost a decade. It was not a mansion. It was not even the biggest house in Briar Glen Estates. It was a simple corner lot home with pale siding, a 2-car garage, a small front porch, and a side yard that wrapped gently toward the entrance road of the subdivision. But to me, it felt like proof that my life had finally stopped falling apart. The day I signed the closing documents, my father came with me. He was already sick then, though he tried to hide it. He walked the property line slowly, with the survey in one hand and his cane in the other, nodding at the little flags placed by the surveyor. He told me, "Always know where your land begins and ends. Most people only care about boundaries after someone crosses them. At the time, I thought he was just being practical. A week later, he helped me plant 3 small ornamental trees along the side strip near the entrance road. They were not expensive, but he picked them out himself. He said they would give that empty stretch of grass some life, and in a few years, I would be able to sit on the porch and see them bloom. He passed away the following spring. So that strip of land was not just extra grass to me. It was the place where my father had stood in the afternoon sun, pressing soil around young roots with hands that had built half the things I knew how to fix. It was where my dog chased leaves in the fall. It was where I put solar lights at Christmas. It was part of my parcel, part of my home, and part of the quiet life I had worked so hard to protect. When I moved in, I did everything right. I read the HOA rules. I paid my dues on time. I submitted paint colors before repainting my shutters. I asked permission before replacing my mailbox. I kept the lawn trimmed, the driveway clear, and the trash cans hidden behind the fence before sundown. I was not the kind of homeowner who went looking for a fight. But Briar Glen's HOA board had a way of making every normal thing feel like a power struggle. At the center of it was Linda Carver. Linda had been HOA president for 4 years, and she spoke about property values the way some people speak about religion. In every meeting, she used the same phrases: curb appeal, neighborhood standards, collective image, long-term vision. She made it sound reasonable until you noticed that every one of those phrases somehow meant the board had more power and homeowners had less room to say no. If someone left a basketball hoop near the curb for one extra night, Linda called it visual clutter. If a family planted flowers she did not like, she called it inconsistent landscaping. If an older resident asked for more time to repair a fence after a storm, Linda said exceptions created chaos. She was polite in public, but it was the kind of politeness that came with a warning label. I learned that early, when I attended my first annual meeting. A neighbor named Mr. Jenkins asked why the board had spent thousands of dollars replacing perfectly good entrance lighting. Linda smiled at him from the front table and said, "Some residents understand investment. Others only notice cost." People laughed awkwardly, and Mr. Jenkins never asked another question. That was how she controlled the room. She did not need to yell. She only needed to make people feel small. For years, I stayed out of her way. I had no interest in HOA politics. I worked, came home, cooked dinner, walked my dog, and kept my little corner of the neighborhood clean. I believed that if I followed the rules and left people alone, they would leave me alone too. That was my first mistake, because the side strip beside my driveway had always bothered Linda. It sat near the subdivision entrance, close enough that visitors saw it when they turned in, but it was legally part of my lot. The HOA mowed the common grass outside the entrance road, but my land began several feet inside that curve. The boundary was clear on the plat map. It was clear on the deed. It was clear on the survey I received at closing. Still, Linda talked about it like it belonged to the neighborhood. Once, during a spring cleanup event, she stood at the edge of my yard and said, "This corner really should be integrated into the entrance design someday." I laughed because I thought she was making casual conversation. She was not. Another time, she suggested that I remove the 3 trees my father had helped plant because they interrupted the visual flow of the entrance. I told her they were staying. She gave me a tight little smile and said, "We'll revisit that when the entrance plan is updated." That sentence stayed with me. If you have ever dealt with an HOA that speaks softly while reaching for your property, you already know the feeling. It starts as a suggestion. Then it becomes a recommendation. Then one morning, they act like your refusal never happened. And if you have been through something like that, leave your thoughts in the comments, because people need to understand that property rights are not just paperwork. Sometimes they are the only thing standing between your home and someone else's ego. The entrance project was first mentioned in a newsletter that arrived in my mailbox that summer. It said the board had approved a beautification upgrade to modernize the front of Briar Glen Estates. There would be improved lighting, stonework, new landscaping, and a more elegant sign to reflect the prestige of the community. There was no map attached, no site plan, no notice to adjacent property owners, no request for my permission. I read it once, frowned, and set it on the kitchen counter. I assumed the work would happen on the actual common area, the section the HOA owned on the far side of the entrance road. That was where the old wooden sign had always been. That was where the county records showed the HOA parcel began. I had no reason to believe they would cross onto my land, but 2 weeks later, I saw white spray paint marks in the grass beside my driveway. Not near the common area, not beside the old sign, on my side strip. I called the HOA management company that afternoon and asked what the markings were for. The receptionist said she would pass my message along. No one called me back. I emailed Linda the next morning. She replied with one sentence. The entrance improvement project has already been approved by the board, and individual homeowner preferences cannot delay community enhancements. Individual homeowner preferences. That was how she described my property line. I should have gone straight to the county right then. I should have pulled every record, called a surveyor, and made it impossible for them to pretend they did not know. But I still believed this was a misunderstanding. I still believed a person in charge of an HOA would not be reckless enough to build on private land without written permission. Then, 3 mornings later, I woke up to diesel engines outside my bedroom window, and by the time I opened my front door, the grass my father had helped me plant was already being torn open by a construction crew. The sound outside my bedroom window was not the normal hum of lawn crews or the soft rush of cars passing the entrance road. It was heavy machinery. At first, I thought there had been an accident near the front of the subdivision. Then I heard metal scraping against pavement, the sharp beep of a truck backing up, and men shouting over an engine that was idling too close to my house. I pulled on jeans, threw on a sweatshirt, and walked to the front door with that strange, sinking feeling you get when your mind understands something terrible before your eyes confirm it. When I opened the door, I saw my side yard torn open. A small excavator was parked beside my driveway. Its bucket had already carved a rough trench through the grass. Wooden concrete forms were lined up in a rectangle where my father's trees had stood. One of the trees was lying on its side near the curb, roots exposed, dirt still clinging to them, like someone had ripped it out of the ground and tossed it aside because it was in the way. For a second, I could not move. The tree was small enough that most people would have called it landscaping. To me, it was one of the last things my father had touched on that property, and now it was lying there behind a stack of pavers, while 2 strangers in work boots walked over the soil like it meant nothing. A contractor in a yellow vest was kneeling near the trench, marking something with orange spray paint. Another man was unloading rebar. A third was pulling black electrical conduit from the back of a truck, and the truck was blocking half my driveway. I stepped outside and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Stop. This is private property." The man with the spray paint looked up, annoyed, like I had interrupted him in the middle of a favor. "You'll have to talk to the HOA," he said. "I'm talking to you because you're digging in my yard." He stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and pointed down the sidewalk toward the entrance road. "We're doing the approved entrance improvement. We've got a contract." "A contract with who?" "The association. That association does not own this land." He gave me a tired smile. The kind contractors give homeowners when they assume the homeowner does not understand anything beyond paint colors. "Ma'am, I just build where they tell me to build." That sentence was the first warning sign that nobody on that crew had checked the property line themselves. I walked closer to the trench and saw the white survey flag near the edge of the grass. It had been bent sideways, almost buried under loose dirt. I picked it up and held it out. "This flag marks my property line. You're past it." The contractor barely glanced at it. "The HOA president said this whole corner is entrance frontage." Entrance frontage. It was an invented phrase, delivered with the confidence of a legal document. Before I could answer, Linda Carver appeared from behind a white SUV parked near the old sign. She was dressed like she had come to supervise a ribbon cutting, not a trespass. Dark slacks, clean jacket, sunglasses pushed onto her head, clipboard in her hand. "Oh good," she said, walking toward me. "You're awake." The way she said it made my stomach turn. Not surprised, not apologetic, almost relieved that I was there to witness what she had done. I held up the survey flag. "Linda, tell them to stop." She looked at the flag like it was a weed. "The board has approved this project. The contractor is authorized to proceed." "Authorized by who? You don't own this strip. We have maintained this entrance corner for years." "No, the HOA has maintained the common area outside the entrance. This is my parcel. My survey shows it. My deed shows it." Linda sighed, long and theatrical, like I was embarrassing myself in front of the help. This is exactly why individual homeowners should not interfere with neighborhood planning, she said. The entrance is the first impression of Briar Glen. It affects every homeowner's property value, not just yours. I looked past her at the torn-up grass, the exposed roots, the wood forms, the conduit waiting to be buried under my land. You removed my tree. It was inconsistent with the new landscape plan. It was on my property. Linda's mouth tightened. It was obstructing the visual line of the sign. For a moment, all I could hear was the idling truck. I remember staring at her, trying to decide whether she truly believed what she was saying, or whether she had simply spent so many years getting her way that the difference no longer mattered. I told the crew again to stop working until the property line was confirmed. This time, the contractor looked at Linda instead of me. Linda did not hesitate. "Keep going, Skatmas. Keep going," she said. "We are not delaying a board-approved project because of one homeowner's emotional attachment to a patch of grass." That was when my neighbor across the street, Mr. Alvarez, stepped out onto his porch. Another neighbor slowed down with her dog. People were watching now. Linda knew it too. She raised her voice. "Let me be very clear. If you touch, remove, damage, or interfere with any component of this entrance feature, the HOA will consider it destruction of community property. You can be fined $500 per day under the enforcement policy." I almost laughed because the threat was so absurd. They were destroying my yard while threatening to fine me for touching what they were building on it. "You cannot turn my land into community property by pouring concrete on it," I said. Linda smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That is your interpretation. My interpretation is backed by county records, and the HOA's position is backed by years of maintenance and board authority." There it was again. Maintenance. As if mowing grass near a road somehow erased a deed. As if the board could vote itself ownership of anything it found visually useful. The contractor shifted uncomfortably, but he still did not stop. One of his workers started carrying bags of concrete mix toward the forms. I stepped in front of him, not touching him, just standing there. The worker froze and looked at his boss. Linda immediately pulled out her phone. "Do not block the contractor," she said. "I will call the sheriff and report that you are interfering with authorized work." "Good," I said. "Call them. I'll show them the survey." That was the first time her expression changed. Only for a second, but I saw it. A flicker of irritation. Maybe even doubt. Not because she thought she was wrong, but because she realized I was not going to step aside just because she used the word sheriff. The contractor came over and lowered his voice. "Look, I don't want trouble. We're already paid for this job. We've got a schedule. Take it up with the HOA. You are standing on my property with equipment. I'm standing where the client marked the build area. And when the client marks the build area across someone else's land, you're still responsible for checking before you pour." He looked away. That told me everything. They had not checked. Linda had given them a drawing, maybe a sketch, maybe a site plan with a vague outline of the entrance corner. And because she spoke with authority, they had accepted it as fact. Meanwhile, the damage kept spreading. The crew had already cut into my grass, pulled up irrigation heads, dragged tools across the side yard, and stacked stone blocks within feet of my driveway. A pile of gravel sat where my dog used to roll in the grass. My small solar lights were broken near the curb. Then came the part that pushed me from angry to cold. I tried to leave for work. I had an appointment that morning I could not miss, and I thought, at the very least, I could document the mess and deal with it when I got back. But when I went to pull my car out, the contractor's truck was still blocking the driveway apron. Not completely, but enough that I could not back out without driving over the curb and through the torn-up section of yard. I asked them to move it. The worker near the truck shrugged. "We're unloading. I need to get out. You'll have to wait." Linda heard that and said, "Construction activity was noticed in the community newsletter. You did not notice me that you would block my driveway. It is temporary. It is also illegal." She tilted her head. "You are being very dramatic." That word hit harder than it should have. Dramatic. My yard was being torn apart. My tree had been removed. A permanent stone entrance was being installed on land I paid taxes on. My driveway was blocked, and the woman orchestrating it was accusing me of being dramatic because I refused to smile while it happened. I took a breath and looked up at my house. That was when I saw the small black security camera mounted above my front porch. I had installed it 2 years earlier, after a package theft. It covered the porch, the driveway, the side yard, and most of the entrance road. At that exact moment, it was recording Linda, the contractor, the truck, the torn-up grass, the survey flag in my hand, and every threat she had made. Something in me settled. The anger did not disappear, but it changed shape. I stopped arguing. I took out my phone and began recording too. Linda noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" "Documenting." "For what purpose?" "For the county. For my attorney. For whoever needs to see why there's a construction crew building on my property without permission." Her face hardened. "You are escalating this unnecessarily." "No," I said. "You escalated it when you brought equipment onto my land." The contractor finally motioned for one of his workers to pause near the forms, but he did not pack anything up. He just waited, hoping the two of us would somehow resolve a property dispute in the middle of a torn-up yard. Linda stepped closer, lowering her voice so the neighbors could not hear as clearly. "You need to think carefully about how difficult you want to make this. The board has enforcement tools, legal tools. We can place fines on your account. We can suspend privileges. We can recover attorney fees. And when this entrance is finished, every person who drives into this neighborhood will know who tried to stop it." It was meant to scare me. Instead, it told me she knew exactly how much pressure she was applying. I looked at the fresh concrete bags, the conduit, the stone blocks, the broken tree, the truck blocking my exit, and the survey flag still in my hand. Then I said the one thing I could say without losing control. "Do not remove anything else from my property." Linda turned to the contractor and said, "Proceed with the elements outside the driveway area." "Not outside my property. Outside the driveway area." That distinction mattered. She was not confused. She was trying to narrow the argument to access, as if the real issue was whether I could back my car out, not whether she had ordered a private entrance monument built on land she did not own. The contractor nodded reluctantly and had the truck moved just enough for me to leave. I backed out slowly, phone still recording, tires crunching near gravel that had not been there the night before. As I pulled away, I saw one of the workers lift the small tree and toss it into the back of a trailer. I almost stopped the car. I almost got out, but I saw Linda watching me from the curb, with that clipboard against her chest, waiting for me to do something foolish, waiting for me to grab the tree, shove a worker, block the truck, damage the forms, anything she could use to turn the story into an angry homeowner interfering with HOA improvements. So, I drove away. Not because I accepted it, because I finally understood the game. They had power in meetings. They had letterhead. They had fines. They had a management company that could send official notices with threatening language. They had contractors willing to follow instructions without asking too many questions. But I had something they did not think mattered. I had the deed. I had the survey. I had cameras. And by the end of that day, I would have every email, every photograph, every damaged sprinkler head, every broken light, every tire mark, every timestamp, and every word Linda had said while standing on my land. That morning, they thought they were building a better entrance for Briar Glen Estates. What they were really building was the evidence against themselves. By the time I got to work, I had already replayed the porch camera footage 3 times in my car. I sat in the parking lot with the engine off, watching Linda point at my yard like it was just an empty space on a design board. I watched the contractor bend my survey flag with his boot. I watched the first tree come out of the ground. I watched the truck block my driveway. I watched my own face on the video, tight and pale, trying not to explode while the HOA president threatened me on my own land. That was when I made myself a promise. I was not going to give Linda the version of me she wanted. I was not going to scream at a public meeting. I was not going to rip out their forms in the middle of the night. I was not going to drag their stone blocks into the road or post an emotional rant online that could be twisted against me later. If they wanted a fight built on authority, paperwork, and official language, then I would give them exactly that. Only cleaner, more organized, and backed by evidence. During lunch, I created a folder on my laptop called HOA Entrance Trespass. Inside it, I made subfolders for video, photos, emails, property records, HOA notices, contractor information, damage, and county contacts. It felt excessive for about 5 seconds. Then I remembered my father's tree lying in the back of that trailer, and I stopped caring whether it looked excessive. I downloaded the full morning footage from my porch camera and saved the original file without editing it. Then I made a copy and wrote down the timestamps. 6:42 a.m., contractor truck arrives. 6:48 a.m., excavator unloads beside driveway. 6:56 a.m., first trench dug into side yard. 7:03 a.m., tree removed. 7:31 a.m., I confront crew and identify land as private property. 7:38 a.m., Linda threatens HOA fines. 7:44 a.m., contractor truck blocks driveway. 7:51 a.m., Linda tells contractor to proceed. Seeing it written that way changed something. It was no longer just a terrible morning. It was a timeline, and timelines are hard to argue with. When I got home that evening, the crew was gone, but the damage looked worse in the quiet. The side yard had been scraped down to dirt, wood forms cut through the grass, in a shape that clearly crossed onto my property. Stacked stone blocks sat under a blue tarp. Black conduit ran from a shallow trench toward the unfinished entrance base. The holes where my father's trees had been were open and raw. 2 of the trees were gone. The third was still standing, but one side of its root base had been exposed. I took photos before I touched anything. Wide shots from the street. Wide shots from my porch. Close-ups of the forms, the damaged grass, the exposed irrigation line, the bent survey flag, and the tire marks beside my driveway. Then I placed a tape measure from the edge of my driveway to the concrete form, and photographed that too. I measured from the wall of my house to the trench, and from the old property marker to the new stone base. I knew my measurements would not replace a licensed survey, but they would show one important thing. I had documented the scene before anyone could clean it up, deny it, or change the story. Then I walked the perimeter with my phone recording video. I said the date out loud. I said the time. I said, "This is the side yard of my property at 118 Briar Glen Court. The HOA entrance construction has entered my private parcel without written permission. No easement has been provided." No contractor identification was posted on site. My voice shook at first, then it steadied. After that, I went inside and pulled the fireproof box from the hall closet. It had my passport, insurance papers, tax records, and the thick folder from when I bought the house. I spread everything across the dining table like I was preparing for court, even though I still did not know how far this would go. The deed was there, the title policy was there, the closing survey was there, the plat map was there, the HOA covenants were there too. Still in the same binder the closing attorney had handed me 6 years earlier. I read the survey first. The line was not ambiguous. My parcel extended along the entrance curve far enough to include the strip Linda had called entrance frontage. The HOA common area began outside that boundary. There was no shaded shared use section across my side yard. No recorded sign easement. No landscape easement. No utility easement where they had started placing conduit. Then I opened the CC&Rs. I expected pages of rules about fences, mailboxes, trash cans, and architectural approval. But buried in the maintenance section, I found language that made me sit up straight. The HOA had the right to maintain common areas owned by the association. Owned by the association, not nearby, not visually connected, not convenient. Owned. Another section said the association could not alter a privately owned lot without written consent of the owner, except in emergency circumstances involving safety or nuisance abatement. A stone entrance sign was not an emergency. Linda's idea of visual flow was not nuisance abatement. I took a photo of that paragraph and highlighted it in yellow. Then I started emailing. First, I sent a message to the HOA management company, copying Linda and every board member whose address I could find. I kept the tone calm because I knew tone mattered. I wrote that construction activity for the entrance improvement project had entered my private parcel without consent. I stated that my deed and survey showed the affected area was part of my lot. I demanded that all work stop immediately until the property line, permit scope, and ownership rights were confirmed. I requested copies of the approved site plan, all permits, contractor agreements, board meeting minutes, insurance certificates, and any document the HOA believed gave it permission to build permanent improvements on my land. I attached 5 photos, not all of them, just enough to make the point. At 9:14 that night, Linda replied. Not the management company. Linda. The entrance improvement project was duly approved by the board. Your continued attempts to interfere with authorized community work are disruptive and may result in enforcement action. The association has historically maintained the entrance corner, and your claim of exclusive control is not accepted. Please govern yourself accordingly. I read that last sentence 3 times. Please govern yourself accordingly. I saved the email as a PDF, printed it, and added it to the folder. Then I wrote back with 1 sentence. Please provide the recorded easement, deed restriction, written owner consent, or other legal instrument granting the HOA authority to construct permanent improvements on my parcel. She did not answer. The next morning, I called the county clerk's office. I asked for the recorded plat, deed history, and any easements affecting my parcel. The woman on the phone gave me the document numbers and told me how to request certified copies online. Before we hung up, she said, "You may also want to check with the building department if there's active construction." So I did. The building department transferred me twice before I reached a permit technician named Mark. I gave him the subdivision name, the entrance location, and the contractor's company name, which I had pulled from the side of the truck in my video. There was a pause while he searched. Then he said, "I do see a permit for monument sign replacement and landscape lighting at Briar Glen Estates. Does it include work on 118 Briar Glen Court?" I asked. Another pause. "No. The permit address is listed under the HOA common area parcel. Can I get a copy of the site plan?" You can submit a public records request. But if work is occurring outside the approved parcel, you may want to file a complaint with code enforcement. That was the first time someone official said the words I had been thinking all day. Outside the approved parcel, I filed the complaint before lunch. I uploaded photos, the permit number, my survey, and a short statement explaining that permanent construction appeared to be taking place on private residential property outside the permitted area. I did not call Linda names. I did not speculate. I simply attached the records and let the facts look as bad as they were. Then I called a licensed surveyor. The first company was booked 3 weeks out. The second said 2 weeks. The third, a local firm owned by a man named Daniel Reeves, asked what was going on. When I explained that the HOA had begun building an entrance sign on my side yard, he went quiet. Then he asked, "Do they have an easement?" "Not that I can find." "Did they get written permission?" "No." "Did they already pour concrete?" "Forms are in. Some base work appears started. They're supposed to come back tomorrow." He exhaled. "I can be there Friday morning." It cost more than I wanted to spend, but I paid the rush fee. Some expenses feel painful because they are optional. This one felt like paying for a lock after finding someone standing inside your house. That afternoon, the HOA management company sent me a formal violation notice. Not an apology. Not a response to my document request. A fine. The notice said I had engaged in interference with approved common area improvements and hostile conduct toward association vendors. It assessed an initial $500 fine and warned that additional daily fines could be imposed if I continued obstructing the project. I scanned it, saved it, printed it, added it to the folder. By Thursday, the crew returned. But this time, I was ready. I had printed copies of my survey and placed them in a folder by the door. My phone was charged. My porch camera was recording. A second camera was aimed from the side window. When the contractor stepped onto the grass, I walked out and calmly said, "You are on notice that this area is disputed private property. I have filed a complaint with code enforcement, requested county permit records, and scheduled a license survey. Any additional work you perform here is being documented." He looked tired. Not angry this time. Tired. "Lady, we're just doing the job. And I am telling you that continuing after notice may create liability for your company." That word landed differently. Liability. Not feelings. Not drama. Not neighborhood politics. Liability. He pulled out his phone and called someone. I could not hear everything, but I heard enough. "She's saying private property again. Says code enforcement. Says surveyor Friday. Yeah, she's recording." After a few minutes, he told the crew to work on the far side of the old entrance only. Linda arrived 20 minutes later. She sat in her SUV, watching the crew avoid my side yard, and even from my porch I could see how furious she was. When she finally walked over, she did not speak to me. She spoke to the contractor. "Why is no one working on the left monument base?" He glanced toward me. "We're waiting on clarification." Clarification was already provided. We need it in writing. That was the first crack. Small, but real. Linda turned to me, her smile gone. "You have created an unnecessary problem." "No," I said. You created a permanent structure on private land without permission. I'm creating a record. On Friday morning, Daniel Reeves arrived in a white pickup with his company logo on the door. He reviewed my deed, the recorded plat, and the prior survey. Then he walked the property with equipment I did not understand, stopping near the curb, near the driveway, near the torn-up grass, and along the side yard. Linda came out of her SUV when she saw him. "Who authorized this?" she demanded. "I did," I said. "This is HOA entrance property." Daniel looked up from his equipment. "Do you have a recorded easement or deeded ownership for this area?" Linda blinked. "The association has maintained this entrance for years." That wasn't my question. For the first time, Linda had to answer someone who did not care about her title. She said, "The board approved the improvement." Daniel nodded politely and went back to measuring. Almost an hour later, he placed a bright pink flag near the edge of the unfinished stone base. Then another. Then another. The line of flags moved through the construction area like a truth being drawn across the ground. The left monument base was not barely over the line. It was deep inside my parcel. Daniel looked from the flags to the concrete forms, then to the conduit trench, then back at the recorded plat in his hand. His expression changed just enough for me to notice. He turned to me and asked quietly, "Did they really pour concrete past this line?" I looked at Linda. For the first time, she was not smiling, and I knew the argument had changed forever. Daniel did not raise his voice. That was what made the moment so powerful. He did not accuse Linda of anything. He did not point dramatically at the stone base or make some big speech about trespassing. He simply stood there in the torn-up grass with his equipment beside him, looked at the line of pink survey flags and said, "This structure crosses well into your parcel." Linda immediately stepped forward. "That can't be right." Daniel looked at her the way a doctor looks at someone who is arguing with an X-ray. "It is right. The old entrance has always been here," she said. "The old entrance was over there," Daniel replied, pointing toward the original HOA common area. "This new base is several feet past the recorded boundary. Several feet, not inches, not a misunderstanding caused by a crooked fence or a vague landscape bed. Several feet. The left stone monument, part of the sign foundation, the conduit trench, and nearly half of the planned flower bed were inside my lot." The flags cut through the construction area like a bright pink accusation. Linda crossed her arms. "The HOA has maintained this corner for years." Daniel glanced at the plat again. "Maintenance does not create ownership." I had read those words in articles online. I had seen people say them in property disputes. But hearing a licensed surveyor say them while standing in front of Linda felt different. It took her favorite argument and reduced it to what it really was: nothing. The contractor walked over, wiping dust off his hands. "So where's the line?" he asked. Daniel pointed. "Right here. Your left monument base is on her property. That conduit trench is on her property. And if your site plan puts the sign face between these two bases, part of the sign is going to be on her property too." The contractor's face went pale in a way I had not seen before. He turned to Linda. "You told us the build area was HOA frontage." "It is," Linda snapped. Daniel said, "Not according to the recorded plat." Linda looked at me then, and for the first time since the project started, I saw something behind her confidence that looked almost like panic. Not regret, not guilt, panic. The kind people feel when the room begins to understand they have been bluffing. I asked Daniel if he could prepare a formal boundary report. He nodded. "I'll include photos, field notes, the recorded plat reference, and the encroachment measurements. You'll want this in writing." Linda said, "The board will need to review any claims before accepting them." Daniel looked back at the flags. "The ground doesn't wait for board review." That sentence stayed with me, because that was the truth Linda had been trying to outrun. HOA authority worked only inside its legal boundaries. Outside them, her title was just a title. Her clipboard was just a clipboard. Her board vote was just a group of people approving something they had no right to approve. By Monday afternoon, Daniel emailed me the preliminary survey letter. I opened it at my kitchen table with my heart pounding. The letter confirmed that the newly installed entrance improvement had crossed the recorded boundary of my parcel. It identified the encroachment as approximately 6 feet at the widest point, with permanent construction elements located inside my private lot. It also stated that no recorded easement appeared on the plat materials he reviewed for monument signage, landscaping, or utilities in that area. 6 feet. I read that number over and over. 6 feet was not a mistake. 6 feet was a decision. That night, I checked the county records again. I searched for easements connected to my parcel, the HOA parcel, the entrance road, and the subdivision developer. I found utility easements along the street. I found drainage easements in other parts of the neighborhood. I found old access language for the original common area. But nothing gave the HOA the right to build a permanent entrance sign on my land. No sign easement, no landscape easement, no maintenance easement across that strip, no recorded agreement with a prior owner, nothing. The next morning, the permit documents came back from the building department through my public records request. The site plan was basic, but it showed the entrance improvement located within the HOA's common area parcel. The permit did not list my address. It did not include any private lot work. It did not authorize electrical conduit across my side yard. That was the second crack turning into a break. I called Mark at the building department again and asked him to confirm what I was reading. He said, "The permit was issued for the association parcel only. If construction is occurring on a private lot, that is outside the permit scope." Outside the permit scope. I wrote those words down. Then I asked about the electrical work. The landscape lights had not been installed yet, but the conduit was already in the trench, and it ran across the same area Daniel had flagged as mine. Mark paused, then said, "Electrical associated with a monument sign generally has to match the approved plan and be inspected. If the trench is outside the approved area, code enforcement needs to see it before it's covered." I sent that to my folder too. By then, the pattern was clear. The HOA had approved a project without confirming the boundary. The contractor had accepted the HOA's markings without verifying ownership. The permit covered common area only. The work crossed into private property, and Linda had responded to my objection not by stopping, but by threatening fines. I knew I needed an attorney. I did not want one. No normal person wakes up excited to spend money on legal letters. I had bills, a mortgage, and a car that made a strange noise every time it rained. But this was no longer a neighborly disagreement. This was a permanent structure being built into my land by an organization that had already shown it would use fines to pressure me into silence. So I called a property attorney named Erin Wallace, whose office was 2 towns over. I sent her everything: the deed, the survey, Daniel's preliminary report, Linda's emails, the violation notice, the permit documents, photos, and the camera footage. She called me back the next day. Her first words were, "You were smart not to touch the structure." I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Then she said, "And you were very smart to document before they had a chance to move anything." Erin explained that the issue was not just that the HOA had annoyed me or damaged landscaping. The bigger issue was encroachment. A permanent entrance monument on private property could create title problems, liability questions, insurance issues, and future disputes if it was not addressed quickly and clearly. She also told me the HOA's fine notice was a problem for them. "They are trying to punish you for objecting to an unauthorized use of your own land," she said. "That will not look good." That afternoon, Erin drafted a demand letter. It went to the HOA board, the management company, the contractor, and the HOA's registered agent. The letter stated that the association and its contractor had entered my private property without consent, removed landscaping, damaged irrigation components, placed construction materials, excavated soil, and begun installing permanent improvements outside the HOA common area and outside the permit scope. It demanded that all work stop immediately, that no further entry occur without written permission, that all evidence be preserved, that the violation notice and fine be withdrawn, that the HOA provide insurance information, and that the encroaching structure be removed or relocated at the HOA's expense. The final paragraph was the one I read twice. It said that if the HOA failed to comply, we were prepared to seek injunctive relief, damages for trespass and property damage, attorney's fees where recoverable, and any additional remedies available under the governing documents and state law. Injunctive relief, damages, trespass, attorney's fees. Those words sounded heavy because they were. For the first time, Linda was not receiving an email from a homeowner she could dismiss as emotional. She was receiving a legal demand supported by survey data, county records, permit documents, and video evidence. Her reply did not come right away. That was unusual. Linda normally answered quickly, as if speed itself proved authority. But this time, hours passed. Then a full day. Then the management company sent a short message saying the matter had been referred to the association's council. That was when I knew they understood the danger. 2 days later, Linda sent one final email, but this one sounded different. It was still defensive, still polished, still trying to sound powerful, but the sharpness was gone. The association reserves all rights and does not admit any wrongdoing. However, pending further review, construction activity near your lot will be temporarily paused. Temporarily paused, not stopped because they were wrong, paused because they had been caught. I forwarded the email to Erin. She responded with 4 words. Good. Do not engage. So I did not. The following Monday, a code enforcement vehicle pulled up near the entrance. A county inspector stepped out with a clipboard of his own. Behind him came Mark from the building department, and a few minutes later, the contractor's truck arrived without the rest of the crew. Linda was already there. This time, she was not smiling at all. The inspector walked the site slowly. He looked at the permit documents. He looked at the survey flags. He looked at the unfinished stone base, the exposed trench, and the line where Daniel had marked the boundary. Then he took photos from several angles. Linda tried to begin with her usual speech. This project is a community enhancement, approved by the board. The inspector cut her off gently but firmly. I'm not here to discuss board approval. I'm here to determine whether permitted work occurred outside the approved parcel. Linda stopped talking. For a few seconds, the whole entrance went quiet, and that silence felt louder than every threat she had made, because the entire story had changed. A week earlier, Linda had stood on my land and acted like the HOA board was the highest authority in the neighborhood. Now she was standing in front of county officials, a license survey, a permit file, and a construction site that did not match the property records. The power had moved out of her hands, and everyone could see it. The county inspector's name was Robert Hale, and he had the calm, unreadable expression of a man who had spent years listening to people explain why their project was somehow different from the rules printed on the permit. He did not arrive angry. That was important. He did not come in waving papers or threatening anyone. He parked near the curb, stepped out with a tablet and clipboard, and introduced himself to everyone the same way. To me, to Linda, to the contractor, to Mark from the building department. Then he looked at the entrance site and said, "Let's start with the approved plan." Linda immediately lifted her chin. "The HOA board approved this improvement months ago," she said. "It was part of our community beautification initiative." Robert looked at her for 1 second. "I'm asking for the county-approved plan." That single sentence changed the air around us. The contractor opened a folder and handed over the permit packet. Robert compared it with the site in front of him, then walked toward the unfinished left monument base. The bright pink survey flags were still in the ground. They cut across the construction area like a warning nobody could pretend not to see. Robert crouched down near the trench. This conduit was installed here. The contractor rubbed the back of his neck. Prepped, not fully connected. Was it inspected? No, sir, not yet. Robert looked toward Mark. Mark looked at the permit file on his tablet and shook his head slightly. Then Robert stood and asked the question that made Linda's face tighten. Who verified the property boundary before work began? No one answered. The contractor shifted his weight. Linda looked at the management company representative, who had arrived 5 minutes earlier, and was pretending to read something on her phone. The treasurer of the HOA board, a nervous man named Paul, stared at the ground. Robert repeated the question. Who verified the property boundary before work began? Linda finally said, "The association has always understood this area to be part of the entrance." Robert did not react. Understood based on what recorded document? Linda's mouth opened, then closed. That was the difference between HOA meetings and county inspections. In HOA meetings, Linda could survive on tone. She could say things like community standards and historical maintenance and reasonable interpretation, and most residents would back down because they did not want to be fined or embarrassed. But Robert did not care about tone. He cared about the approved parcel, the permit scope, the recorded plat, and the work actually sitting in the dirt. Daniel, my surveyor, arrived a few minutes later with a printed copy of his boundary report. He handed one to Robert, one to Mark, one to my attorney Erin, and one to the contractor. Linda did not get one until she reached for it herself. Robert reviewed the report in silence. The rest of us stood there listening to traffic pass at the subdivision entrance. It was strange how ordinary everything sounded while something so important was happening. Birds in the trees, a delivery van slowing at the stop sign, a dog barking 2 houses down, and in the middle of it, an unfinished stone entrance that had become evidence. Robert walked the line with Daniel. Daniel pointed out the boundary, the encroachment, the location of the monument base, and the conduit trench. Mark took photos. The contractor stopped trying to explain. Linda kept her arms folded so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. Finally, Robert turned to the contractor. "This work does not match the permit." The contractor said, "We built according to the layout provided by the HOA." Robert asked, "Did your company independently confirm the property line?" The contractor hesitated. "No." "Did you obtain written permission from the private lot owner?" "No." "Did the permit authorize work on this private lot?" "No." Each answer landed heavier than the last. Linda interrupted. "The homeowner is making this more complicated than it needs to be. This is a small strip at the entrance. The entire community benefits from—" Robert raised one hand. "Ma'am, the size of the strip does not determine ownership." Linda went silent. I felt Erin shift beside me. She did not smile, but I could feel the satisfaction in the pause that followed. For days, Linda had treated my land like a detail. Robert had just made clear that, legally, a small trespass was still a trespass when it involved someone else's property. A sheriff's deputy arrived shortly after that. Linda had called him. I knew it before he even stepped out of the cruiser, because she suddenly looked more confident, as if the uniform would put the situation back in her favor. She walked toward him quickly and said I had been harassing contractors and obstructing HOA work. The deputy listened patiently. Then he asked to see the documents, not hear the story. See the documents. I gave Erin the folder, and she handed him copies of the survey, the deed page, the permit record, the violation notice, and still images from the porch camera. Daniel showed him where the boundary flags stood. Robert explained that code enforcement was already reviewing work performed outside the approved permit area. The deputy looked at the flags, then at the stone base, then at Linda. "So this is a property dispute with documentation," he said. Linda said, "It is HOA property." The deputy asked, "Do you have a deed or easement showing that?" Linda's face hardened. "The association has maintained it." The deputy nodded once, slowly, and said, "Maintenance is not the same as ownership." There it was again, from the surveyor, from the county inspector, now from the sheriff's deputy. The same wall Linda kept running into, no matter which direction she turned. The deputy told everyone to keep the peace, avoid touching or removing anything, until the county and attorneys finished reviewing the matter, and stay off disputed private property unless legally authorized. He did not arrest anyone. He did not need to. His presence did something better. It removed Linda's favorite threat from the table. She could no longer imply that calling the sheriff would prove I was the problem. She had called him herself, and he had asked her for the same documents she did not have. By the end of that site visit, Robert issued a stop work order for the left side of the entrance improvement and the affected electrical trench. A red notice was posted near the unfinished base. It looked small against the stone and dirt, but to me, it felt enormous. Stop work. Those 2 words did what my emails could not do. They froze the project. The contractor was instructed not to cover the trench, not to continue the monument base, and not to install any lighting until the permit issue and property boundary problem were resolved. Mark told the contractor that any revised plan would need to match the correct parcel and receive proper approval. Robert told the HOA that construction outside the permitted area could trigger penalties and would need corrective action. Corrective action. Linda looked like she had swallowed glass, but the site visit was only the beginning. 3 nights later, the HOA held an emergency board meeting. Linda tried to keep it closed, calling it a legal discussion. But enough residents had seen the stop work order and the county vehicles that questions were already spreading through the neighborhood. By the time the regular public session began, the room was packed. People who normally skipped HOA meetings were standing along the back wall. Mr. Alvarez was there. Mr. Jenkins was there. The older woman whose fence repair Linda had once threatened to fine was there too. And I was there with Erin beside me, a folder in my lap, and no intention of yelling. Linda opened the meeting with a stiff statement about misinformation and temporary permitting issues. She said the board was working with professionals to resolve confusion regarding the entrance boundary. Confusion. That word almost made me stand up too fast. But Aaron placed one hand lightly on my arm. So I waited. During homeowner comments, Mr. Jenkins spoke first. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the anger underneath. Did the board approve spending HOA funds on land the HOA does not own? Linda said. The board approved an entrance improvement based on long-standing maintenance practices. Mr. Jenkins replied, That is not what I asked. A murmur moved through the room. Then Mr. Alvarez asked, Was an updated survey obtained before signing the contractor agreement? The treasurer, Paul, looked down at the table. Linda answered, We relied on existing understanding of the entrance area. Someone in the back said, So no. Another resident asked how much had already been paid to the contractor. Paul finally admitted that a deposit had been paid from HOA reserves, and another installment was due when the stonework was completed. Then a younger homeowner asked, Are we paying attorney fees for this? Nobody answered right away. That silence did more damage than any speech could have. When it was my turn, I stood up slowly. My hands were cold, but my voice stayed steady. I did not insult Linda. I did not accuse the whole neighborhood. I did not make it personal, even though it felt personal. I said, This is my recorded property survey. This is the county permit showing the work was approved for the HOA common area, not my lot. This is the surveyor's encroachment report. These are photos of the construction on my parcel. This is the violation notice fining me $500 for objecting. And this is the email where I asked the HOA to provide a recorded easement or written permission, and none was provided. I laid the copies on the table. The room went quiet. Then Aaron stood beside me and read the section of the CC&Rs I had highlighted days earlier. The association had authority over common areas owned by the association. It could not alter a privately owned lot without written consent, except in limited emergency circumstances. She looked at the board and said, An entrance monument is not an emergency. No one laughed, but everyone understood. Linda tried one last time to regain control. The board acted in what it believed to be the best interest of the community. From the back of the room, the older woman with the fence said, By taking somebody's yard, that broke the room open. Residents started asking questions all at once. Why had no updated survey been ordered? Why had my tree been removed? Why was I fined instead of notified? Why did the contractor receive markings that crossed a private lot? Why was the board using reserve funds for legal problems created by its own failure to verify the boundary? Paul finally admitted that no one on the board had personally compared the site plan to the recorded plat. The management company representative admitted that the contractor had relied on a layout provided through the HOA, and Linda, cornered by her own paper trail, said the sentence that sealed it. We believed the homeowner would cooperate once the improvement was underway. There was a silence after that unlike any silence I had heard in that room before, because everyone knew what she meant. They had not asked, because asking gave me the chance to say no. They had started construction first, then expected pressure, embarrassment, and fines to force me into accepting it. Aaron wrote that sentence down. So did 3 other homeowners. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to suspend further work pending legal review. They also agreed, under pressure from residents, to provide a full accounting of project expenses, legal costs, and communications with the contractor. Linda did not look at me when the meeting ended. But Paul did. He came over while people were stacking chairs and said quietly, I'm sorry. We should have checked. It was not enough. But it was the first honest thing anyone from the HOA had said. Outside, as I walked back toward my car, I passed the entrance road. The unfinished stone base sat under the red stopwork notice, surrounded by dirt, flags, and caution tape. For the first time since the construction started, it did not look like their monument. It looked like their mistake. The stopwork notice stayed on that unfinished entrance base for 13 days. Every morning when I walked my dog, I passed it. The red paper was zip-tied to a temporary post beside the stonework, fluttering in the wind like a public confession. Cars slowed down when they entered the neighborhood. Neighbors glanced at it. Some pretended not to stare. Others gave me small nods from behind their windshields, the kind of quiet support people give when they finally realize the person everyone called difficult was actually the person who had been telling the truth. Linda stopped walking near my house. For years, she had moved through Briar Glen like she owned every sidewalk, every flower bed, every mailbox, every blade of grass that could be seen from the road. But after the county inspection, She drove straight to her garage and avoided eye contact at the mail kiosk. The board's attorney eventually sent a letter through Erin. The language was careful, very careful. The HOA did not admit liability. The HOA did not waive rights. The HOA did not concede intentional wrongdoing. But underneath all that legal padding, the message was clear. They were removing the encroaching structure. They were withdrawing the $500 fine. They were paying to restore the damaged portion of my yard. And they were submitting a corrected entrance plan to the county that kept every permanent improvement within the actual HOA common area. I read that letter twice at my kitchen table. Then I sat back and cried. Not because I felt weak. Because for almost 3 weeks, I had been living with the kind of pressure that settles into your body. Every truck outside made me look through the blinds. Every HOA email made my stomach tighten. Every time I saw the torn soil where my father's trees had been, I felt that same sharp anger rise again. And now, for the first time, I could breathe. The removal happened on a Thursday morning. This time, the contractor arrived with a different attitude. No smirks, no shrugging, no, take it up with the HOA. A supervisor came to my door before anyone stepped onto the grass and asked Erin, who was there with me, where they were permitted to work. Daniel's survey flags were still in place. The county inspector had approved a removal plan. Everything was documented. It was almost funny how respectful people became once the paperwork pointed at them. They cut the unfinished stone base apart in sections. They removed the conduit from my side yard. They pulled out the concrete forms, dug out the gravel, and loaded the broken pieces onto a trailer. The same kind of trailer that had carried away my father's trees now carried away the monument Linda had tried to plant in their place. I stood on the porch and watched. I did not cheer. I did not film it for revenge. I only watched until the last piece of stone was gone from my land. Over the next few weeks, the HOA's insurance carrier contacted me through Erin. They paid for the damaged irrigation line, the destroyed solar lights, the scraped yard, and the replacement of the trees. The HOA had to cover the deductible and part of the restoration costs directly because not everything fit neatly under the insurance claim. The total cost to the association became the thing people whispered about most. Not just the construction waste, the legal fees, the survey reimbursement, the permit revision, the removal work, the landscaping restoration, the emergency meetings, the delay penalties the contractor tried to charge because the board had given him a bad build area. By the time it was over, that small strip of grass had cost the HOA more than the entire entrance project was supposed to cost in the first place. And Linda paid a price too. At the next public meeting, the room was full again. This time, she did not sit quite as straight at the front table. Paul, the treasurer, presented the cost breakdown with a voice so tense it sounded like every number hurt him personally. Then Mr. Jenkins asked for a motion to remove Linda as board president. For a moment, no one moved. Then the older woman with the fence seconded it. The vote was not unanimous, but it was enough. Linda resigned from the president position before the board could formally remove her. She said she was doing it to prevent further division in the community. But everyone in that room knew the truth. She was not stepping down because the community was divided. She was stepping down because her authority had finally run into a boundary she could not fine, shame, or talk her way across. After that, Briar Glen changed. Not perfectly. HOAs do not become reasonable overnight, but the board passed a new rule requiring a current survey before any project near a property line. Adjacent homeowners had to receive written notice. Any construction contract had to include responsibility for verifying boundaries and permit scope, and no violation fines could be issued against a homeowner who was disputing unauthorized work on their own property until the dispute was reviewed by independent counsel. It was a boring rule, which meant it was probably a good one. A few months later, the entrance sign was rebuilt on the correct side of the line. Smaller than Linda's version, less dramatic, completely within HOA property. Every time I drove past it, I noticed the empty space where the left monument would have swallowed my yard. That space became my favorite part of the entrance. I replanted the side strip in early spring. 2 new ornamental trees went in where the old ones had been removed. They were not the same trees. They never could be. But when I pressed soil around the roots, I thought about my father standing there years earlier, telling me to know where my land began and ended. Back then, I thought he was talking about dirt. Now I understood he was talking about dignity. Because a property line is not just a measurement on a survey. It is the edge of someone else's authority. It is the place where their plans, their opinions, their money, their title, and their ego are supposed to stop. Linda forgot that. The HOA forgot that. And for a while, they thought I would be too embarrassed, too tired, too intimidated, or too afraid of fines to remind them. But I did not win because I was louder. I won because I stayed calm when they wanted me angry. I saved the footage before they could rewrite the story. I read the deed. I checked the permit. I called the county. I hired the surveyor. I let the facts walk into the room before I did. So if you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, a contractor, or anyone else who treated your property like their opportunity, remember this. Do not give them the outburst they can use against you. Give them the documents they cannot explain away. And if this story made you think of a boundary someone tried to cross in your life, share your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, save it for later, and subscribe if you want more stories where ordinary homeowners fight back the right way, with evidence, patience, and a paper trail strong enough to make the most arrogant people finally step back over the line.